Imagine this. You're a 62-year-old retired Marine Corps veteran, living peacefully on your ranch, when one day you find out your HOA has slapped you with 87 parking tickets and a lion on your property. The catch: you don't even own a car. Let me tell you a story that has left me utterly baffled, frustrated, and frankly, angry. I'm 62 years old, a retired United States Marine Corps veteran who served this country for over 2 decades. After my service, I finally settled down on a peaceful little ranch in the countryside. It's not much, but it's mine. A place where I can enjoy my retirement, tend to my land, and live out the rest of my days in quiet dignity. But recently, my life took an absurd turn when I received something completely unexpected. 87 parking tickets from my homeowners association, HOA. Yes, you heard that right. 87 parking tickets. And as if that wasn't enough, they slapped a lion on my property too. Now here's the kicker. I don't even own a car. That's right. No sedan, no truck, no motorcycle, nothing with wheels or an engine. So how could I possibly rack up so many parking violations? How does someone without any means of transportation end up being fined thousands of dollars by their HOA? This whole ordeal feels like some kind of Kafkaesque nightmare, except instead of faceless bureaucrats, it's a group of neighbors wielding clipboards and rulebooks. Today, I want to share my side of the story because I believe there are lessons here, not just about fairness and justice, but also about what happens when power goes unchecked. To understand why this situation is so outrageous, let me give you a little background. Like I said earlier, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. When I left active duty, I spent several years working odd jobs before deciding to buy this small piece of land. It's modest, just a few acres, but it's everything to me. Out here, I grow vegetables, raise chickens, and keep things simple. I've lived alone for most of my retirement, enjoying the solitude and hard work that comes with maintaining a ranch. When I bought the property, I knew it was part of an HOA community, but honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. The rules seemed reasonable enough. Keep your grass trimmed, avoid loud noises late at night, maintain curb appeal. Nothing too crazy. At least, that's what I thought. Over time, though, I started noticing how nitpicky the HOA board became. They sent letters about minor infractions, like having a mailbox painted the wrong shade of gray or leaving tools outside for more than 24 hours. But none of those issues prepared me for what happened next. It all began one crisp autumn morning when I opened my mailbox to find what appeared to be yet another mundane communication from the Homeowners Association, HOA. At first glance, it looked like any other notice, perhaps a reminder about landscaping guidelines, or some minor infraction that would require little more than a shrug in compliance. But as I unfolded the letter, my heart sank. What stared back at me was not just one ticket, but an avalanche of parking violations totaling 87 separate infractions. According to the HOA, these tickets had accumulated over nearly a year, each carrying a hefty $50 fine. That's right, $4,350 worth of alleged wrongdoing. And the kicker? I don't even own a car. At first, I thought there must have been some kind of clerical error. Maybe someone else in the neighborhood had parked illegally near my property, and their actions were mistakenly attributed to me. It wouldn't be the first time bureaucracy got things wrong. So without hesitation, I picked up the phone and called the HOA office to explain the situation. "Listen," I said calmly, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I don't own a vehicle. There's absolutely no way I could have committed these violations." Their response left me speechless. Instead of acknowledging the possibility of a mistake, they doubled down, insisting they had photographic evidence proving otherwise. Photographic evidence against a man who doesn't even have a driveway long enough to park a car. This claim struck me as utterly absurd. My ranch is modest, a few acres of land with a gravel path leading up to the house. Sure, there's space for someone to pull off the road temporarily if needed, but it's far from ideal for parking anything larger than a bicycle. Yet here they were, accusing me of repeatedly violating the HOA's strict no overnight parking policy. Overnight parking. On what planet did they think this was happening? The more I pressed them for details, the murkier the situation became. They refused to provide specifics during our initial conversation, citing confidentiality protocols and procedural red tape. All they offered was vague reassurance that the photos clearly showed vehicles parked on my property after hours. Frustrated but determined to clear my name, I requested copies of the so-called evidence. After weeks of back-and-forth emails and phone calls, they finally sent me a packet containing grainy images taken by security cameras positioned around the neighborhood. When I reviewed the photos, my jaw dropped, not because they proved guilt, but because they revealed just how flimsy the HOA's case really was. Most of the pictures showed nothing more than empty patches of dirt or stretches of gravel where cars might have theoretically been parked. Others captured shadows cast by trees or utility poles, which they apparently mistook for vehicles. None of the images depicted anything remotely resembling an actual car, let alone one belonging to me. It was as if they'd gone out of their way to fabricate violations where none existed. But why target me specifically? Was it personal animosity, or simply incompetence run amok? As I dug deeper into the matter, I discovered unsettling patterns suggesting both possibilities. For starters, several neighbors mentioned similar run-ins with the HOA, though none had faced consequences quite as severe as mine. One elderly woman told me she'd received warnings for leaving her gardening tools outside overnight. Another neighbor complained about being fined for having mismatched curtains visible through his windows. Clearly, the HOA had a reputation for nitpicking, but targeting someone without a car felt particularly egregious. Then there was the timing of the accusations. Looking closely at the dates listed on the tickets, I noticed something peculiar. Many of the alleged violations occurred during periods when I was out of town visiting family or attending veterans events. How could I possibly be responsible for parking violations while hundreds of miles away? When I pointed this out to the HOA, they dismissed my alibi as irrelevant, claiming their system operated automatically and didn't account for individual circumstances. Automatic systems. What kind of Orwellian setup were they running? As days turned into weeks, the stress of dealing with the HOA began taking its toll. Sleepless nights became routine, plagued by thoughts of losing the only home I'd ever truly loved. Financially, the weight of potential fines loomed large. Even though I knew I wasn't guilty, fighting the HOA meant hiring legal representation, a costly endeavor for someone living on a fixed income. Every knock at the door made my stomach churn, fearing it might be a process server or sheriff delivering foreclosure papers. The emotional toll was equally devastating. Friends and acquaintances started treating me differently, unsure whether to believe my side of the story or assume I was hiding something. Loneliness crept in, compounding the sense of betrayal I felt toward a community I once trusted. Despite the mounting pressure, I refused to give in. I knew standing up for myself was essential, not only for my sake, but also for others who might fall victim to similar injustices. With renewed resolve, I reached out to local attorneys specializing in HOA disputes. Thankfully, I found a lawyer sympathetic to my plight. Together, we began building a defense strategy rooted in facts and logic. We filed formal requests for additional documentation, including maintenance logs for the security cameras used to capture the disputed photos. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, I was ready to meet them head-on. What struck me most throughout this ordeal was the sheer audacity of the HOA's behavior. Here was an organization ostensibly created to protect property values and promote harmony within the community, yet its actions bordered on harassment. By issuing baseless fines and threatening foreclosure, they weren't just punishing perceived rule breakers. They were instilling fear. Fear of speaking out. Fear of questioning authority. Fear of losing everything you've worked so hard to achieve. And therein lies the true tragedy of stories like mine. They expose systemic flaws in how power is wielded and abused within supposedly democratic institutions. Reflecting on the experience now, I realize how easily such situations can spiral out of control. Without proper oversight or accountability mechanisms, HOAs operate in a gray area between public governance and private enterprise. They make rules, enforce penalties, and collect dues, all without answering to elected officials or adhering to transparency standards typical of municipal governments. In theory, this model allows for efficient management of shared resources. In practice, however, it often leads to unchecked authoritarianism, disguised as community service. For me personally, the fight against the HOA has become less about vindication and more about principle. Yes, clearing my name remains a priority, but equally important is shining a light on broader issues affecting countless homeowners nationwide. Stories like mine resonate because they highlight universal themes of fairness, justice, and resilience. Whether battling City Hall, corporate greed, or overzealous regulators, ordinary people sometimes find themselves thrust into extraordinary battles. And while victory isn't guaranteed, perseverance almost always yields valuable lessons. In closing, let me leave you with this thought. Imagine waking up one day to discover your livelihood, and perhaps even your freedom, is under threat due to forces beyond your control. Now imagine facing those challenges alone, armed only with determination and a steadfast belief in doing what's right. That's precisely where I stand today. A retired Marine Corps veteran fighting tooth and nail to preserve the dignity and independence he sacrificed so much to earn. If nothing else, I hope sharing my story inspires others to question authority, demand transparency, and never back down in the face of injustice. Because ultimately, standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about setting an example for future generations. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the HOA escalated the situation to a level that felt almost surreal. They didn't stop at issuing 87 parking tickets totaling $4,350, a sum I still maintain is completely baseless. They went further by placing a LIEN on my property. For those unfamiliar with legal terminology, a LIEN essentially means they're claiming ownership rights over part of my ranch until the debt is paid off. In practical terms, this gave them leverage to seize my land if I failed to comply with their demands. It was as though they were holding my home hostage, all because of fines I never should have received in the first place. The moment I learned about the LIEN, my stomach churned. Up until then, I had hoped this whole mess could be resolved through dialogue, or perhaps a simple correction of records. But now, it became painfully clear that the HOA wasn't interested in reason or fairness. This wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was about exerting power. By slapping a LIEN on my property, they crossed a line from bureaucratic pettiness into outright aggression. And for someone like me, a retired Marine Corps veteran who has spent decades serving his country and working hard to build a modest life, the idea of losing my home due to fabricated accusations felt like a betrayal of everything I'd ever stood for. To make matters worse, the process of imposing a LIEN happened with little warning. I received no formal hearing or opportunity to present my case beforehand. One day, I opened another ominous envelope from the HOA, only to discover official documents stating that my property was now encumbered by a financial claim. The language was cold and impersonal, filled with legalese designed to intimidate rather than inform. Phrases like default judgment and foreclosure proceedings jumped off the page, each word striking fear into my heart. Suddenly, the stakes were higher than ever before. Not only was my reputation on the line, but my very livelihood was at risk. What made this escalation even more infuriating was the sheer audacity of the HOA's actions. Let's be honest here. If you accuse someone of violating a rule they physically cannot break, like parking a car they don't own, and then use flimsy evidence to justify your claims, isn't it reasonable to expect some level of accountability? Apparently not. The HOA operated as though their authority was absolute, untouchable, and above reproach. Their decision to impose a LIEN suggested they believed they could do whatever they wanted, regardless of whether justice was served. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a number on a spreadsheet, a line item in their budget projections. As the reality of the LIEN sank in, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, naturally, was at the forefront. How dare they treat me this way? After years of paying dues, maintaining my property, and contributing positively to the community, I deserved better. Yet beneath the anger lay a deep sense of helplessness. Fighting back against an organization with seemingly endless resources felt daunting, especially for someone living on a fixed income. Legal battles are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Did I really have the energy, or the means, to take on such a fight? But giving up wasn't an option. Not for me. As a Marine, I've faced adversity countless times throughout my life, both during active duty and in civilian life. If there's one thing the military teaches you, it's resilience, the ability to adapt, overcome, and persevere in the face of overwhelming odds. So while the HOA may have expected me to buckle under pressure, they underestimated the strength of someone who's been trained to stand firm. Losing my ranch wasn't just unthinkable, it was unacceptable. This was my home, my sanctuary, the culmination of years of sacrifice and hard work. I wasn't about to let anyone take it away without a fight. With renewed determination, I reached out to attorneys specializing in HOA disputes. Thankfully, I connected with a lawyer who understood the gravity of the situation and agreed to represent me. Together, we began crafting a strategy to challenge the LIEN and expose the HOA's misconduct. Our first step was to file a formal objection, arguing that the fines underlying the LIEN were invalid due to lack of evidence. We also requested detailed documentation of the alleged violations, including copies of the photos and camera logs used to justify the tickets. Additionally, we highlighted procedural irregularities in how the HOA handled my case, pointing out that I had been denied basic due process rights. While navigating the legal system provided a glimmer of hope, the emotional toll of the LIEN continued to weigh heavily on me. Every knock at the door sent shivers down my spine, fearing it might be a sheriff delivering foreclosure papers. Friends and neighbors started treating me differently, unsure whether to believe my side of the story or assume I was hiding something. Even routine tasks like grocery shopping or attending church felt tainted by the looming threat hanging over my head. Loneliness crept in, compounding the stress and anxiety. Nights were sleepless, plagued by visions of losing everything I held dear. Reflecting on this experience, I realized the HOA's decision to impose a LIEN revealed deeper systemic issues within homeowner associations across America. These organizations often operate in a gray area between public governance and private enterprise, wielding significant power without adequate oversight. While their stated purpose is to protect property values and promote harmony within communities, the reality is far murkier. Without transparency, accountability, or checks and balances, HOAs can easily devolve into authoritarian regimes, punishing perceived infractions with disproportionate severity. For me personally, the LIEN represented a turning point in my battle against the HOA. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and privilege in our society. Why is it that ordinary citizens like me must jump through hoops to prove our innocence, while institutions like the HOA face minimal scrutiny despite wielding immense influence? Why do we allow these entities to operate with impunity, unchecked by democratic principles or moral compasses? Questions like these haunted me as I navigated the labyrinthine world of legal disputes, searching for answers and justice. Ultimately, the LIEN taught me that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about setting an example. By refusing to back down, I hope to inspire others facing similar injustices to speak out, demand transparency, and hold those in power accountable. Whether battling City Hall, corporate greed, or overzealous regulators, Ordinary people sometimes find themselves thrust into extraordinary battles, and while victory isn't guaranteed, perseverance almost always yields valuable lessons. In closing, let me leave you with this thought. Imagine waking up one day to discover your livelihood, and perhaps even your freedom, is under threat due to forces beyond your control. Now imagine facing those challenges alone, armed only with determination and a steadfast belief in doing what's right. That's precisely where I stand today. A retired Marine Corps veteran fighting tooth and nail to preserve the dignity and independence he sacrificed so much to earn. If nothing else, I hope sharing my story inspires others to question authority, demand transparency, and never back down in the face of injustice. Because ultimately, standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about setting an example for future generations. After the HOA's decision to place a LIEN on my property, I knew I couldn't face this battle alone. The stakes were too high, and the complexity of the legal system was daunting. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, protecting my home, and standing up against an organization that had overstepped its bounds. With renewed resolve, I began the arduous process of fighting back, seeking justice in a system that often feels stacked against ordinary people like me. The first step was finding the right attorney, a task easier said than done. I reached out to several law firms specializing in real estate disputes and homeowner association conflicts, explaining my situation in detail. Many expressed sympathy but hesitated to take on the case due to the costs involved or the likelihood of prolonged litigation. However, after weeks of searching, I finally connected with a lawyer who not only understood the gravity of my predicament, but also shared my determination to hold the HOA accountable. She listened intently as I recounted the absurdity of the parking tickets, the lack of evidence, and the draconian imposition of the LIEN. When she agreed to represent me, it felt like a lifeline, an acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy for thinking this whole ordeal was unjust. Together, we devised a multi-pronged strategy to challenge the HOA's actions. Our primary goal was to invalidate the fines themselves, which served as the foundation for the LIEN. To do this, we requested every piece of documentation related to the alleged violations, including the photos, camera logs, and any internal communications discussing my case. We also filed a formal objection to the LIEN, arguing that it was based on illegitimate claims and violated basic principles of fairness and due process. Additionally, we highlighted procedural flaws in how the HOA handled the matter, such as failing to provide adequate notice or opportunities for me to contest the charges before escalating to a LIEN. Every step of the way, we aimed to expose the cracks in their argument, showing that the HOA's actions were not just unreasonable, but potentially illegal. As the legal process unfolded, I quickly realized how grueling and expensive it could be. Court filings required fees, depositions demanded preparation time, and expert witnesses sometimes needed to be brought in to support our arguments. For someone living on a fixed income, these costs added another layer of stress. Yet, despite the financial strain, I refused to back down. I took odd jobs around the ranch, repairing fences, selling excess produce at local markets, to help cover expenses. Friends and family pitched in where they could, offering emotional support and occasional financial assistance. Knowing that others believed in my cause gave me strength during moments when doubt crept in. Beyond the courtroom, I sought to amplify my voice by sharing my story publicly. I reached out to local news outlets, advocacy groups, and online forums dedicated to exposing HOA abuses. Stories like mine tend to resonate because they highlight universal themes of fairness, accountability, and resilience. Within days of going public, I received messages of encouragement from strangers across the country who had faced similar battles. Some offered advice based on their own experiences. Others simply wanted to express solidarity. One woman even sent me a handwritten letter recounting how her elderly father had been targeted by his HOA for planting flowers outside regulation colors. These connections reminded me that I wasn't alone. that countless individuals have endured the same frustrations and injustices at the hands of overzealous associations. Public attention also brought unexpected benefits. A journalist from a regional newspaper decided to write an exposé on my case, shining a spotlight on the broader issues plaguing HOAs nationwide. The article included interviews with legal experts, community advocates, and former HOA board members who spoke candidly about the lack of oversight and transparency within these organizations. It painted a damning picture of how easily power can be abused when left unchecked. Once the story went live, the reaction was overwhelming. Local residents began questioning the HOA's practices, while national advocacy groups reached out to offer additional resources and guidance. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like momentum was shifting in my favor. Still, fighting back came with its share of challenges. The HOA dug in their heels, refusing to acknowledge fault or negotiate a settlement. Their lawyers responded to our motions with counterarguments, dragging out the proceedings and racking up more legal bills. At times, it felt like they were trying to wear me down financially and emotionally, hoping I'd eventually give up. But quitting wasn't an option. Each setback only fueled my determination to see this through to the end. I reminded myself constantly why I was doing this, not just for myself, but for everyone else who might find themselves trapped in a similar situation. One particularly frustrating aspect of the fight was the sheer imbalance of power between me and the HOA. They had access to teams of attorneys, deep pockets, and institutional knowledge of how to navigate the legal system. Meanwhile, I was a single retiree with limited resources, relying heavily on my lawyer's expertise and my own grit. Yet paradoxically, this disparity became one of my greatest motivators. If I gave in, it would send a message that ordinary citizens are powerless against entrenched systems of authority. By continuing to push back, I hope to demonstrate that perseverance and integrity can prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Throughout this journey, I learned invaluable lessons about the importance of standing up for what's right. Whether you're battling an HOA, challenging corporate misconduct, or advocating for social change, the act of resistance matters. It sends a powerful signal to those in power that their actions will not go unchallenged. More importantly, it inspires others to speak out and demand accountability. In my case, taking a stand against the HOA wasn't just about saving my ranch. It was about exposing systemic flaws and pushing for reforms that could benefit countless others. Looking back on this period of my life, I'm struck by how much I've grown. Before this ordeal, I might have described myself as quiet and reserved, content to live peacefully on my ranch without drawing attention to myself. But adversity has a way of revealing hidden strengths. Through this experience, I discovered a fierce determination I didn't know I possessed. I learned to advocate for myself, navigate complex legal processes, and rally support from unlikely allies. Most importantly, I reaffirmed my belief in the power of resilience and the importance of never backing down in the face of injustice. In closing, let me reiterate this truth. Justice is rarely handed to us on a silver platter. It must be fought for, earned through persistence and courage. While the outcome of my case remains uncertain as of now, I take solace in knowing that I've done everything possible to defend my rights and protect my home. Whether or not I ultimately succeed in court, I've already won in a deeper sense. I've refused to let fear dictate my actions, and I've inspired others to do the same. And if there's one thing I hope readers take away from my story, it's this. No matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, always remember, you have the power to fight back. As I sit here reflecting on this entire ordeal, the 87 parking tickets, the lion on my ranch, and the months spent fighting against an overzealous HOA, I can't help but feel a profound mix of emotions. This experience has been one of the most challenging chapters of my life, but it has also been one of the most transformative. It's tested my patience, resilience, and faith in humanity, while simultaneously teaching me invaluable lessons about fairness, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right. While the legal battle may not yet be resolved, the personal growth and perspective gained along the way are undeniable. One of the most significant lessons I've learned is that power unchecked breeds abuse. The HOA operates in a gray area where accountability is often lacking. Their authority comes with few safeguards to prevent misuse, leaving homeowners vulnerable to arbitrary decisions and punitive measures. In my case, they wielded their power recklessly, issuing baseless fines and imposing a lien without evidence or due process. This lack of oversight highlights a broader issue. When institutions, whether they're HOAs, corporations, or governments, are allowed to operate without transparency or accountability, individuals suffer. My story isn't unique. Countless others have faced similar injustices, often feeling powerless to fight back. Recognizing this systemic flaw has made me more vigilant and committed to advocating for reforms that prioritize fairness and equity. Another lesson I've taken away is the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. There were moments during this ordeal when giving up seemed like the easier path. The financial strain, the sleepless nights, and the constant weight of uncertainty all took their toll. But quitting would have meant surrendering not just my property, but also my dignity. As a retired Marine Corps veteran, I've always believed in the value of resilience, of pushing forward even when the odds seem insurmountable. This experience reinforced that belief. Every time I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself of why I was fighting, not just for my home, but for principle. Standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about refusing to let fear or intimidation dictate your actions. And through sheer determination, I've proven to myself that I still have the strength to overcome obstacles, no matter how daunting they may appear. This journey has also taught me the critical role of community and solidarity. When I first began sharing my story, I worried about being judged or dismissed as someone overstating their grievances. To my surprise, the opposite happened. Friends, family, neighbors, and even strangers rallied around me, offering support in ways both big and small. Some provided emotional encouragement, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. Others shared their own experiences with HOAs, helping me understand the scope of the problem and offering practical advice. Public attention brought additional allies into the fold, from journalists exposing the HOA's misconduct to advocacy groups providing resources and guidance. Without this network of support, I doubt I would have had the courage or means to push back as forcefully as I did. It's a powerful reminder that we're stronger together and that collective action can drive meaningful change. Perhaps the most poignant lesson has been the realization that justice is rarely easy to achieve. Growing up, I believed in a world where truth and fairness prevailed naturally, that if you were innocent, proving it would be straightforward. Life has since shown me otherwise. Navigating the legal system has been an eye-opening experience, revealing its complexities, biases, and inefficiencies. Winning requires persistence, strategy, and often substantial resources, things many people simply don't have access to. Yet, despite these challenges, pursuing justice remains essential. Even when victories are hard-won, the act of resisting injustice sends a powerful message that we will not tolerate oppression, no matter how entrenched or institutionalized it may be. On a personal level, this ordeal has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and self-reliance. For much of my adult life, I prided myself on independence. After serving in the military and retiring to a quiet ranch, I relished the simplicity of living off the grid, freed from external interference. But this experience shattered that illusion. No matter how self-sufficient you think you are, there will always come a time when you need help from lawyers, advocates, friends, or even strangers. Asking for assistance doesn't mean weakness. Rather, it demonstrates wisdom and humility. Embracing this mindset has deepened my appreciation for the interconnectedness of human relationships and the importance of leaning on others during difficult times. Finally, this saga has reignited my passion for advocacy and systemic reform. What started as a personal battle against an HOA has evolved into a broader mission to expose and address the flaws within these organizations. Through public speaking, media appearances, and collaboration with advocacy groups, I've become a voice for change, urging policymakers and community leaders to implement stricter regulations and oversight mechanisms for HOAs. Reform efforts might include mandatory training for board members, clearer guidelines for dispute resolution, and penalties for associations found guilty of misconduct. While these changes won't happen overnight, every step toward greater accountability brings us closer to a fairer system. In hindsight, this experience has shaped me in ways I never anticipated. It stripped away illusions of invulnerability and replaced them with a deeper understanding of the complexities of modern life. It's taught me to value perseverance, community, and justice above all else. And perhaps most importantly, it's reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope, if not for immediate resolution, then at least for growth, connection, and progress. To anyone reading this who finds themselves in a similar situation, know this: you are not alone. Whether you're battling an HOA, fighting corporate greed, or standing up against any form of injustice, remember that your voice matters. Speak out, seek support, and never underestimate the power of resilience. Change begins with individuals brave enough to challenge the status quo. And while the road ahead may be long and arduous, the impact you make, both personally and collectively, is worth every step. After all, sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured by what we win, but by who we become in the process.